Hello, students, and welcome to another episode of College Prep World History. This is Mr. Willis bringing you an episode on the Allied plan for victory. Once the United States enters World War II, the Allies, the Americans, take control of the Allied forces. Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes supreme commander of those forces in the European conflict and on the European continent. And so therefore, this is where we really begin to see the Americans start to take a much more aggressive and much more centered control of the command of those forces overseas. So as you guys can see here on this first slide, we have the effects or the results of D-Day, where we have troops and equipment making its way to Normandy Beach after June 6, 1944. And so we're going to see how we get to this particular point in the war. There's a lot that goes on prior to this. I'll give you an example. An example would be as the Americans entered the war in 1942. There's a lot of argument back and forth about what should be the plan. How should we attack this? Some people wanted to attack Japan first because the Japanese were the ones that attacked the Americans. And then some people said, no, we got to help the British out in Europe because Hitler's really the biggest enemy that we have. And so there was this back and forth that went on and continued on for years throughout the war. But this Allied plan for victory really is going to be setting the stage of how we're going to fight in Europe. Where should we go first? And so what you're going to see is us lay the foundation work here to see how the Americans really play an integral role in the success of the Allied forces over the course of 1942 through the end of the war in 1945. Now, we won't cover all those pieces in this lecture. However, we will cover one of my most exciting parts of World War II to teach to you. Every year I get to teach this lesson. It's really something special for me. So let's go ahead and go into this lecture. Okay, the first slide, we're going to tell a little bit of a personal story with World War II, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this. So our first slide here, we're going to see a picture of a soldier. And this soldier, as all wars have personal stories, stories that people come back to and can tell. This soldier in the Second U.S. Army, has a really important story to tell. So who and why is kind of the answers we're looking for those answers to those questions in this lecture. Why do we talk about this particular man's story? Why not another person's story? And you probably don't recognize this picture from anywhere. He's not a famous person. He's not somebody who is widely known or recognized like a Dwight D. Eisenhower or a George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, nobody like that. But probably the most important stories are these ones that you don't hear. And so one of the reasons why I'm going to tell this story is because it's something that you wouldn't normally hear in a history book. So our third slide, we're going to tell a little bit of the story of this soldier here. Served in the U.S. Army from 1940 to 1944. So this particular soldier enlisted in the military. He knew that a draft was coming, and again, a draft would be where the government is going to pull numbers and tell you when to report for military service. And he knew eventually his number would be called, so rather than wait, he enlisted, and he did so prior to Pearl Harbor, prior to the attack of Pearl Harbor. He did so in 1940 to serve his country. All right, and he fought in General Patton's 7th Army, which we'll be getting into a little bit here in the class today. General Patton's 7th Army fought in North Africa, in the campaigns in North Africa, in Sicily, in the conquering of Sicily in a rather easy way, as well as in Italy, which was much, much tougher for the Allied forces in Italy. And this soldier Corporal Eugene L. Baird fought in the famous battles of Casablanca in North Africa, Anzio in Italy, Kasserine, Messina, Palermo, and Monte Cassino, all these battles taking place in this North African and Italian campaign. And you may not recognize the ribbons and the medals that you see at the bottom of this slide, but you have two what we call Purple Hearts, and we'll talk about that, and 3 Bronze Stars. We'll talk about the meaning of those medals here next. So what are these? The Bronze Star would be awarded to a soldier who, in a battle, performed some sort of heroic or meritorious achievement or service. Has to do something important in order to gain the Bronze Star. And Corporal Baird earned 3 Bronze Stars. And he earned 2 Purple Hearts. The Purple Heart is awarded to a serviceman who is wounded or killed in any action against the enemy of the United States, or as a result of an act of any such enemy or opposing armed forces. So he received 2 of them. So obviously one for sure is a wounding. He was wounded, all right? And he actually was wounded twice, so he received 2 Purple Hearts. So not to spoil the story too much, he survives World War II through 1944. And in 1944, he was wounded at Monte Cassino, and he was wounded badly enough that they sent him back home to recuperate, back home being Moreland, Oklahoma, where his mother lived, and his sister. And he recuperated there, and by the time he had fully healed in 1945, the war in Europe was over. So he didn't have to report back for service in 1945, and he was honorably discharged from his duties as a service member of the U.S. Army. And here's a couple of pictures of Corporal Eugene L. Baird, some of his service, one of his service pictures here on the left-hand side. All right, and that patch you guys would see, you see 2 patches there on his left arm. One of those patches, the A5, is for his artillery 5th Division, and the triangular-looking patch that's immediately below that artillery 5th Division patch is his rank of corporal. So 2 lines for the rank of corporal, and that's just above a private. So not extremely high in rank, but Corporal Eugene L. Baird. And then as you guys can see here on the right-hand side, okay, officers and servicemen in the military did not just perform military duty, all right, they also performed manual tasks. In this case, Corporal Baird is chopping wood. So just an ordinary guy, serviceman, served in the military, did his duty, served for his country in World War II, and served honorably for those 4 years, earning 2 Purple Hearts and 3 Bronze Stars. So, again, why are we talking about Corporal Baird? So I'm going to tell a little bit of the story here for you guys so you guys can understand why him. All right, and so what we have here on this slide is we have a letter from Jeffrey Keyes, Major General, USA Commanding General of his force here at the 2nd Headquarters. And this particular letter was written in the field on May 8th, 1944. And the subject here in the top says the award of a Bronze Star Medal, right, to Corporal Eugene L. Baird. And that's his service number, 1803889, Field Artillery, United States Army. And under the provisions of paragraph 3, okay, and I'm not going to read all that, but as you guys understand, North African Theater of Operations, he is awarded a Bronze Star Medal, and here is why. For meritorious service and support of combat operations in Sicily and Italy from July 14th, 1943 to February 19th, 1944. As a wire corporal, okay, and what that means is Corporal Baird was in charge of communications with the artillery. It's really important that the artillery receive communication from the front, from soldiers in the front, that they're firing in the correct area, because you don't want to hit your own army with the artillery that you're firing from the back. So really important that a line of communication remain open between the front and the back. And Corporal Baird was a wire corporal. He was making sure that those lines of communication stayed open. Corporal Baird displayed exemplary leadership and devotion to duty in effecting the successful employment of his section under adverse conditions of weather, difficult terrain, and enemy fire, and during all hours of the day and night. Corporal Baird ensured the prompt installation and efficient maintenance of wire communications during combat. The manner in which he performed these services exemplifies the highest standards of conduct on the part of a non-commissioned officer of the United States Army. Basically, it means he was an officer and he didn't go through, the military schooling that a normal officer would go to. All right, home address, Moreland, California. All right, again, Major General Jeffrey Keyes commanding. All right, and so as you guys can see, his service was over a period of months. All right, and he was able to maintain those lines of communication between the front and the back very effectively. And so, therefore, he was awarded the Bronze Star. Now, again, why this man? Why not anybody else? Why not somebody totally, some other stranger that we don't know about? Well, the important lesson here to learn is that the reason why I'm telling this story is because that man, Corporal Eugene Leroy Baird, was my grandfather. My grandfather served his country in World War II, went overseas, went to North Africa, fought the Germans, the Africa Corps in North Africa, fought against the Italians, fought against the Germans in places like Anzio, which you guys will see a video, an Edpuzzle video on, right? And did so with distinction. And so here is a picture of my grandfather, Corporal Eugene L. Baird, or as we called him, Gene, right? I called him Grandpa, but everybody called him Gene, right? And here he is with my grandmother Rose, who they lived happily in California from 1947 after the war, got married, and lived there their entire lives. My grandfather lived there until his death in 1992, and my grandmother lived there until her death in 2013. And so I'm really proud of these two individuals and being a part of both of these individuals being a part of probably the greatest generation of Americans to have ever lived. And so it is my absolute pleasure to every year be able to tell the story about Corporal Eugene L. Baird, something that I will forever be able to be grateful for him coming home, because if he doesn't come home, Mr. Willis doesn't exist. All right, so we're going to be moving on to our lesson here. All right, after I show you guys some of the medals that Corporal Baird had. All right, and this is the medals that belong to my mom. All right, my mom now has these possessions. As you guys can see, there's a lot of different medals here. All right, a lot of these medals here at the bottom and these ribbons here at the bottom are there because he's a part of the military. As the military won a lot of these battles, most servicemen who served in World War II got World War II victory medals, victory in Europe medals, so on and so forth. So a lot of these are very symbolic of the service that was given out by these military servicemen. All right, so let's get to the meat and potatoes of the lesson now that I've told you a little bit of my history, my personal history, and my connection to World War II. All right, let's talk about that Allied plan for victory. And so we got three very important places or areas that we're going to focus on. The first one here is Operation Torch, which is the North African campaign. Again, Corporal Baird is a part of Operation Torch in the Italian campaign from 1943 to 1945. Very important that we see this is the first place that the Allied forces, when the United States enters the war, this is the first place that they will fight. This was very much for debate. It was very much up for debate. And the United States under President Roosevelt wanted to attack France first. They wanted Operation Overlord first before attacking North Africa. And it was Winston Churchill that convinced President Roosevelt that Operation Torch was much more important to the overall victory of the Allies, because he believed that conquering North Africa and reclaiming that land and conquering Italy was defeating what he called the underbelly, the soft underbelly of the Axis powers. And so reluctantly, Roosevelt agreed, and so some of the first forces that fight in World War II are the first ones that are sent through the Atlantic and into North Africa. Not into the Pacific, not into France. The first forces are going to be in North Africa. And so we'll cover a little bit of that here today, as well as the Italian campaign from 43 to 45, right, which ultimately ends up in Austria, and then Operation Overlord, which is probably much better known as D-Day on June 6, 1944. So what is that plan? So in December of 1941, after Pearl Harbor, 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, FDR and Churchill are going to meet, and they're going to discuss these two things that I just mentioned to you. Okay, the big thing here is what you need to write down, right, is that Hitler is the bigger threat. All right, so the war plan is, number one, Hitler is a bigger threat. All right, so Germany, the defeat of Germany and Italy is the priority of the Allied forces. So this is the big reason why the United States will go to North Africa first, because they believe that defeating Hitler and defeating Mussolini is the priority. All right, and then point number two, which was never really agreed to by Winston Churchill. It was actually Roosevelt who came out and said unconditional surrender of the Axis powers would only be accepted, and Churchill went along with this. Churchill didn't know that Roosevelt was going to be the one who said this is the only way it's going to happen. Roosevelt pushed for unconditional surrender, meaning we're not going to have any conditions whatsoever. You're going to just do it. You're going to surrender, and whatever happens, happens. And so because of this, Joseph Stalin, a communist, believe it or not, agrees to join Roosevelt and Churchill. And again, this is mainly because of the Operation Barbarossa and Hitler trying to invade the Soviet Union. And now you have the Soviets, you have the Americans, and you have the British fighting all on the same side. So again, from this slide, you need to know the two biggest parts of the war plan. Number one, that the main part of the war needs to be fought in Europe. You got to defeat Hitler and Mussolini first, and then unconditional surrender is the only way that this war would end. All right, so that takes us to North Africa. Who are your main combatants in North Africa? And we're going to talk about really three people, but the reality is Montgomery, is the main commander of the Allied forces in North Africa. Even though George Patton, the general of the 7th Army, will not necessarily agree with this, he's going to have to report to Montgomery. Montgomery is the supreme commander of those forces in North Africa, and Dwight D. Eisenhower is the supreme commander of all of Europe. So Erwin Rommel is your Desert Fox that I mentioned to you guys before. Erwin Rommel is your most famous tank commander of the Africa Corps, and Montgomery probably equates to him in terms of tank warfare. So you have three of the biggest, most important tank warfare generals of all time fighting against one another in North Africa. You have Rommel, you have Montgomery, and you have George Patton. All right, and George Patton's on our next slide, the North African campaign. All right, you want to write down the Battle of El Alamein. You have that at the top there, the Battle of El Alamein. Okay, write that down. This is where the Allies invade Morocco, right? Place like the Battle of Casablanca, Algeria, right, and Tunisia. Talk about Tunisia, right, in the video, the Ed puzzle, right? George Patton and Montgomery butt heads. They both think they know the best, and so they need to put that aside and work together, all right, in order to defeat Erwin Rommel. So what ends up happening here is in North Africa is that Erwin Rommel during the campaign falls ill. He falls really, really sick, and so he's not able to continue the battle against Montgomery and against Patton, which kind of dooms the Africa Corps in North Africa. He has to go back to Germany to recuperate. And so what you need to know basically is right here is the Battle of El Alamein is won by Patton's 7th Army, U.S. 7th Army, all right, and Montgomery's British tanks. Right, they're able to push the Nazis to the brink, much like at Dunkirk, where the French had to flee across the sea. Something very similar occurs here, where the Africa Corps is backed up into Tunisia, and the only way out of Tunisia is to cross to Sicily. So they have to retreat across the sea into Sicily, and we see a very similar situation developing here. And so you see this quote from Winston Churchill: "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." He's basically saying from this point on, we're going to win. We're going to keep winning, and we're going to just keep pushing. So we've seen a complete flip of the strategies between the Allies and the Axis powers. The Axis powers now are going to be the ones that are going to be mainly on the defensive, whereas the Allied powers are going to be on the offensive. They're going to be the ones attacking the Axis powers. So they really start to gain the upper hand here in North Africa. So this North Africa campaign is called Operation Torch. I won't go and get into too much detail here, but just know that Operation Torch, and you want to write that down, Operation Torch is the name for the North African campaign. All right, and as you guys can see on the left-hand side here, Patton's forces are going to enter Morocco, all right, into Casablanca, where we have a major battle, all right, and they're going to move eastward all the way into Tunisia, where you meet the 5th Armed Divisions of the Africa Corps, all right, and this is where they're going to push them across into Sicily. So once the African Corps is out of North Africa, both Patton and Montgomery are going to cross as well into Sicily and then ultimately into Italy, because they're on this offensive. They're going to pursue these Italian and German forces, and so ultimately what happens here is that Italy is going to have to withdraw from the war. Once the Allied forces enter Italy, it only becomes a matter of time that the Italians are going to withdraw, and Mussolini is ousted from power. He basically goes into exile for a brief period of time until he's freed by the Germans. And then Sicily is conquered easily by Patton's 7th Army. Montgomery receives a little bit more resistance than Patton does on the island of Sicily, and then they cross over to the toe of the boot, so to speak, in Italy, where there's very little resistance. And it's not until they get to up into Anzio and Monte Cassino that they're really going to, in those central and almost northern parts of Italy, where they're going to meet heavy resistance from the Germans, where the Germans dig in. So the invasion of Italy here, what you guys need to know is Sicily conquered by the Allies, right? Italy ousts Mussolini. They depose Mussolini. Okay, ultimately Mussolini is going to be brought back to Italy, and they're going to shoot Mussolini and then hang him. Okay, so Mussolini will die. His own people will kill him. And by the time we reach 1944, Rome is going to be captured by the Allied forces. They're going to enter. General Clark, the British commander of some of the British forces in Italy, is going to enter Rome and conquer Rome in 1944. And so what this does is it basically it gets rid of Italy from the war. It causes great casualties among the Germans, and the Allies have basically gained the upper hand in this war by launching this massive offensive in Operation Torch. All right, so that kind of sums up our lecture here today with the invasion of Italy, with Operation Torch in North Africa, and what we're seeing over the course of several years, of course. We're seeing this from 1942 to 1944. We're seeing this massive, brutal war taking place in places such as Monte Cassino and Anzio and Casablanca and Tunisia, right, and El Alamein. We're seeing all these places having major battles taking place. And it's in 1944 at Monte Cassino, at Anzio, it's actually at Monte Cassino where my grandfather is wounded, and he has to go back to Oklahoma to recuperate and to recuperate from his wounds. So that's it for today. I'm proud to bring you this lecture on behalf of the entire World History Team. I am Mr. Willis. We will see you guys soon.